Okay guys, this is video 3 for chapter 7. Welcome back. We're going to be looking at real income together. We're still having coffee. Today is coffee with friends. Well, and since inflation reminds me so much of temperature, it just made perfect sense to me to think of warm drinks, hot drinks, good places, right? Okay, real income using the CPI. What we're going to do in this case is look at how do we calculate real income in a more accurate way. Now, there is a very good estimate, and there's nothing wrong with this method. It's a quick method. It's how people do it, which is you take your income, you deduct from it the inflation rate. So if you want to go and ask for a raise from your employer and you don't know how much you should ask for, look up the inflation rate and then decide, okay, my raise has to be higher than the inflation rate if it's going to make a difference for me. Otherwise, it really is holding back my real income. So it's a good way to work with just rates. Most people have no clue what the CPI is, right? It's not something that is going to be an everyday conversation. But using a CPI gives you a more accurate result. Now I'll show you what that means in this example I'm going to walk you through in a minute. So when we are using real income to divide, it's called real income adjusted to the CPI, which means we're using a fraction of some sort, or it's called real income adjusted to the inflation rate. That means we're using this method of deduction right here. So in this chapter, we're going to be doing real income as in income, the nominal, divided by the CPI over 100. This is important. What is it? CPI over 100. This is the mistake that a lot of students make. They leave out the 100 and they come up with much smaller real income than they should. So here's an example. Let's say one has an income of $40,000 in 2002. With a CPI of 179.9. Well, what does this mean about their real income for the year 2002? It means this 40,000, when we divide it by the CPI over 100, you see how the CPI is 179.9, but we're using 1.799. It's because we moved this decimal point over twice, because we're dividing by 100, right? So when we do 40,000 divided by 1.799, we get a real income of 22,235. This actually means that since that 1982, when the base year set the CPI at 100, notice that by then it had increased about 80% because it's almost 180. And so it has really eaten away at the actual value of this money, a significant amount of eating away. Now, it gives you one set of information, but if you really want to know what it means, you have to compare it to a different year. So if you want to know if the raises you're getting actually helped. So in the year 2003, this person's income, their nominal income, jumps up quite a bit. It jumps up to 44,000. This is a significant jump, right? It's a 10% jump in income. Well, what's the CPI doing? The CPI also increased. So the income went from 40,000 to 44,000. The CPI from 179.9 to 184. Well, if we were to look at the real income in 2003, we would take this 44,000, the nominal income, we would divide it by 1.84 like we did in the first set for 2002. Why? Because we're moving this decimal point here twice, right? We're moving it twice, because we're dividing by 100. This gives us a real income of 23,913. So the CPI as a percentage changed by 2.3% from 179.9 to 184, but the income, as in the nominal, changed by 10% from 40,000 to 44,000. Now, obviously, just looking at it that way, we know that the real income would have gone up. The question is, by how much and what does it mean in dollars? So the third step, the first step is you figure out the real income for the first year. The second step, you figure it out for the second year. The third step is you deduct. You deduct 2002 from 2003. So in 2003, we have a real income of 23,913. We deduct from it the real income from 2002 of 22,235. We have a real disposable income that has increased by 1,678. I'm going to add the word real right now because this is a very important word to have. This person has gained purchasing power or real income of 7.5%, right? This is the accurate calculation. Why? Because let's look at the approximate. When we just deduct inflation as an inflation rate from income as a rate, look what we get. So if we were to do the approximate method, we would get a 10% increase in nominal income minus the 2.3% in inflation. It gives us a 7.7 change in real income. Is 7.7 close enough to 7.5? Pretty much. Is it as accurate? No. So can you use this method? Frankly, deducting the inflation rate from income as a rate is more prevalent. It's the more common method. But the more accurate method is to do what we just did together, which is you look at the real income of 1 year, the nominal divided by the CPI of that year over 100. Then the nominal of a different year divided by the CPI of that year over 100. And then you deduct the new year here, the new year, you deduct it from the old year. And this is the new year, this is the old year, I think. So we're deducting the year that we have at hand. We put it first. So here's 23,913, that's 2003, deducted from the previous year of 2002. And that gives us what our real disposable income were. Now, if we were doing it the other way around, meaning if somehow we ended up with a smaller, in 2003, if the real income was lower than 2002, we would have a negative real disposable income, and it would show us that we actually lost in the value of money. So you know what this means in other words? The maximum new additional savings you have this year are 1,678. If you want to be able to buy something out of the additional, like let's say you wanted to buy a new bike for $1,000, let's say, well, that leaves you 678 for savings. And this is where it's coming from. It's coming out of your disposable income. That's what that means. Now, if you actually register a negative, if for whatever reason the CPI spiked so much, like for instance, your income went up by 10%, but the CPI spiked, let's say, by 13%, not going to happen, but not likely. But if that's the case, you end up with a negative here for real disposable income. It would actually mean you have to cut back on your expenses exactly the equivalent of that. So if you end up at negative 800, then you have to figure out a way to cut back on your expenses by 800 if you want to break even buying the same things this year as you did last year. That's the interpretation. Now, who does inflation benefit? We keep saying inflation is not really a scary thing unless it's too high. We actually want some inflation in the economy. We just want it to be at an increase from year to year at a lower rate than the income that we are seeing, than the nominal income. Together they make a stronger positive real income change. Now, inflation automatically benefits a group of people. Real estate owners will benefit. Inflation index securities owners, negative real interest rate paid, positive interest rate earned, and getting real raises. Okay, what does that mean? One at a time. If you own a house, you're going to find that the value of your house might increase from year to year simply because inflation is getting greater. Look, it's simple. Housing is one of the prices. If everything else around you is becoming more expensive, the raw materials, the labor, the maintenance, the air conditioners, the windows, the doors, everything else, so is the house. And then when new houses are being built in your neighborhood, they elevate the prices of the older houses, even though nothing much has been done to them. So just because there's inflation in an economy, you might benefit if you buy a house or any real estate, you sit on it for X number of years, and then you try to resell it. So that's going to benefit you in that sense. Inflation index securities. They're also known as Treasury inflation protected securities. A security can be a bond, it can be a bill, it can be and notes. So you're looking at bills, bonds, and notes. Any one of those three is called securities. Now we're talking here if they're inflation indexed. The word indexed means attached to. So an indexed garage is a garage that is attached to your house. We always talk about language and really the importance of understanding the various meanings of certain words. They just clarify life so much, and communication is a big deal, right? So what we're saying here is if you own one of these and the inflation rate is tagged to the interest that you're earning from these securities, then you could see an increase in how much you're earning in interest from them just because inflation occurred. I tell you about this stuff in your outline, about these particular ones. They are not for you young people. These are very, very safe investments. They are for people who are parking their money and safeguarding it, not necessarily growing their money. So I'm not really as in their investments. I'm not telling you to go run and buy them. I'm just saying if you have them, you could automatically benefit if that's the case. Negative real interest rates. So interest rates, when they are real, you've deducted the inflation rate from them. If you are earning an interest, well, in this case, you're paying. If you are paying an interest, then you actually want to make sure it is less than inflation if possible, right? So in other words, the bank, you get a loan, and the amount that you agreed to pay on that loan, let's say, is 3%, but the inflation rate is 4%. When you do 3% minus 4%, you have a negative 1%. That means that you're returning the money worth a percentage less than when you actually used it. You're returning the money to the bank worth less than when you had it in your hands and you purchased with it. You got the good deal. The bank didn't. In other words, if you borrow $5,000 from grandma and give it back to her 6 years from now and you give her just $5,000, you're ripping off grandma. Because during those 6 years, inflation increased every year, eating away at the value of the money. So in all fairness, you should give her back the $5,000 plus the cumulative interest that came along with it. Now, positive interest rates, when they are earned, is like the bank, when the bank charges us way more than 2 or 3% on our loans, right? A loan is usually in double digits, and if it's a single digit, it's going to be, the odds are higher than the inflation rate. Because what's happening with this one is you're the lender and you're lending somebody money, but when they give it back to you, they give it back to you worth more than when you actually had given it back out to them. So if the bank lends you $1,000 and collects from you 10%, you're giving it back to them at $1,100, right? But maybe in the meantime, inflation only increased by 3%. So for the bank, they're pocketing that $70. They're getting back the $1,030, so the $1,000 that they lend out, the $30 that is the change in inflation, and the $70 is the difference that they're keeping in their pocket as pure profit. So if you're earning an interest, you want it to be higher than the inflation rate. So this year, you might find that the interest that you're earning on your savings account are nothing, 1%, 1.5%, but the inflation rate exceeds 8.5%. So this money that you're earning, the interest that you're earning, is way too low against the inflation rate. That's a bad thing. But if you actually are paying out a loan at less than the inflation rate, it is actually a good thing for you because you're returning the money worth less than when you actually had it. One last point, getting real raises. You want to make sure the raise you're getting is greater than the inflation rate. Otherwise, you're falling behind and you're losing in your real disposable income. So when you're getting a real raise, so a raise of like this year, unless you're getting a raise of 8.6% or more, you actually have a negative real raise. That means your actual raise isn't enough. You still have to cut back to break even. Okay, we'll stop right here and pick it up in the next video.